Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this special live stream right here live from the 1836 studios at Texas Scorecard. I'm Brandon Waltens, and right now we're going to be listing off the 8 legislative priorities for the Republican Party of Texas as decided by delegates at last week's Republican Party of Texas convention. Now, first of all, if you watched some of our coverage last week, you'll know that we were live in Houston as delegates, thousands of them, came to Houston in order to not only elect party leadership, tweak their party platform, but perhaps what's getting the most attention now is those legislative priorities. Delegates were given the option of 15 legislative priorities. They voted, and the top 8 are what are officially going to be the party's priorities. That voting happened on Saturday. Those votes have now been tallied, and we have the list here that we'll be announcing right now of what those 8 priorities are, the 8 things that the Republican Party of Texas says the state legislature needs to do when they return next January. So let's get right to the list. First off, I want to say these are in no particular order. We don't have the ranked order, but these are the 8 priorities. And we'll start with number 1, protect our elections. Now, election integrity, that has been a priority of the party last session as well. In fact, last session it was the number 1 priority of the Republican Party of Texas. Of course, the Texas legislature ultimately passed an omnibus election integrity bill, but part of the problem there was it lowered the act of illegal voting from a felony down to a misdemeanor. Now, this is something that a lot of conservatives took issue with. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick even took issue with it during his speech to delegates last week. That is specifically part of this priority now, saying restoring those felony penalties for election code violations. Also included in this, interestingly, are establishing closed primaries in Texas. So a little bit of a more broad election integrity effort here. We'll have all that language at texasscorecard.com, but that's the first legislative priority here. The next one is a new addition to the list, and that's banning Democrat committee chairs. This is an issue that got a lot of attention last session as State Representative Brian Slayton introduced an amendment to the rules that would ban the practice. Right now in the Texas legislature, and most notably in the Texas House, Democrats, despite not being in charge of the legislature, they haven't been for 2 decades now, are given committee chairmanships. They're put in leadership positions where they can kill legislation. Well, there was certainly a new movement, a big movement among delegates to get rid of this. The chairman of the party, Matt Rinaldi, has spoken against this, and now banning Democrat chairs will be a legislative priority for the Republican Party of Texas. The next one is another carryover from their previous legislative priorities. That's abolishing abortion in Texas. Certainly, Texas has passed the heartbeat bill. There is a trigger law that will outlaw abortion should Roe v. Wade be overturned, which could happen any day now from the Supreme Court. But the Republican Party of Texas is doubling down on the effort, saying that they want to abolish all abortion in Texas. And so that is the third legislative priority as we're going through this. 4, we've got stop sexualizing Texas kids. Now, this is an issue that has been brought up certainly over the last year, as parents have found pornographic material in public school libraries all across the state. This isn't just Houston, this isn't just Austin, Dallas, suburbs, rural areas. They found pornographic material. Now we've got as a priority for the Texas GOP increasing and strengthening the state's obscenity laws in order to prohibit those books from being given to children. Next legislative priority, as we continue down the list, again, these are in no particular order, banning gender modification of children. This was a legislative priority of the party last session, passed the Texas Senate, but was killed in the Texas House. Ever since then, there's only been more of a movement to get rid of this, as we've seen more and more children subjected not just to surgeries or treatments, but also some of this so-called counseling. All of that is encompassed in this priority, the psychological, social transitioning, and any other methods. Again, this is an issue the Texas House so far has decided not to act on. It's an issue they've never had a vote on. We'll see if they change their course next session. Moving along, our next legislative priority here is securing the border and protecting all Texans. Specifically, the big news here is that the legislative priority calls for the governor or the legislature to declare an invasion on the southern border, and thus use the state's constitutional power to go and repel illegal aliens themselves. This is something that the governor has so far not shown a willingness to do. You do see Carrie Lake, a gubernatorial candidate in Arizona, saying that's something she will do if she wins. And just recently, you even had Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton in an interview with us at Texas Scorecard saying that should the governor or legislature do this, he would be happy to defend this in court. And so securing the border, protecting Texans, declaring invasion on the southern border, another priority of the Republican Party of Texans. We've got two more here. Our next one is parental rights and educational freedom. Now, school choice was a priority of the party last session. Didn't get much traction. But ever since then, there's been an increased focus on what kids are learning in public schools specifically, and there's certainly been, I think, a renewed effort for parental choice in education. This particular priority, the language says that parents are the primary decision makers for their children in all matters, and that money should follow the child, talking about some school choice programs with this caveat, without strings attached. And so that's certainly going to be a contentious issue as that particular legislation gets crafted and we see how it moves along in the next session. So far, the Texas legislature has not been hospitable to school choice legislation, but once again, the delegates of the Republican Party of Texas are saying that they want to see the legislature step up and pass some sort of parental rights and educational freedom legislation next session. And we've got our last legislative priority here. Reminding you again, these are not in any order, so it's not necessarily the least one, right? But that is defending our gun rights. Now, this one is very, very timely, especially in light of some of the movements from Democrats in Texas, but also Republicans like U.S. Senator John Cornyn in Washington, D.C., who have moved to restrict gun rights as recently as this week. In fact, if you saw some of our coverage from the Republican Party of Texas convention, you saw that Senator John Cornyn got booed for nearly 15 minutes by delegates when he gave a speech to the thousands of people gathered there. Why was he booed? Well, it was specifically because of legislation that he is supporting and championing that would restrict gun ownership and gun rights. And certainly something he's come under fire from grassroots. And specifically, this legislative priority does call on the Texas legislature to eliminate all gun-free zones. And so those are the 8 priorities of the Republican Party of Texas. These are things now that grassroots are going to be taking to their lawmakers, and they're going to be saying, look, this is what, as Republicans, if we're going to elect Republicans to the legislature, this is what we expect to happen. Now it is up to citizens to go out and carry that message if they want to push these priorities. You know, the clock starts ticking now, right? The legislative session starts in January. Committee hearings are happening throughout the fall as legislation gets prepared. And so these 8 legislative priorities will give a little bit of a preview of what the priorities are of the Republican voters and what they believe should be the priorities of the Republican legislators. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We have an article up. We're going to have an article up at TexasScorecard.com where we're going to list all these out along with their official language. We'll have that up at TexasScorecard.com. And if this is your first time joining us on our YouTube page, please go ahead, hit like, hit subscribe, maybe hit that bell so you can get notified anytime we're live. Tomorrow at 5:30, Friday at 5:30 p.m., I'm going to be sitting down with our publisher, Michael Quinn Sullivan, and we're going to be going through these priorities in a little more detail and talking about what's next, what are the next steps for these priorities as we approach the legislative session. For right now, thank you so much for joining us for this special Texas Scorecard report.